Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've been to see The Equalizer 2, which is a sequel to The Equalizer.
Yes.
From 2014, I think.
That's right.
Which was Antoine Fuqua and Denzel Washington teaming up.
Yes.
Again, they'd done Training Day before that.
That's right.
I don't know if they've done another film.
They've done The Magnificent Seven subsequently.
Yeah.
So it's their fourth teaming.
I've not seen that one. The Equalizer was about this guy, Robert McCall, who is like ex sort of special forces military type of something sort of secret servicey.
Yes.
And he... It was something about him being dead or thought to be dead, and that he kind of uses that as a reason to get out. But then he finds himself put out, and his wife has died, and he's sort of slightly advancing years. And then there's something about a teenage sex worker who's sort of sex slave, I guess, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, and he basically sort of avenges her or something. I don't remember it that well, but I remember really enjoying it, and I remember enjoying the idea of the main character being essentially a kind of flawless person. Like, he's kind of troubled about things in his past, but he's perfect. He always does the right thing, and he's really good at fighting. And
all throughout the movie, when I was watching it, I was thinking how Denzel Washington is the greatest black star in history. I mean, I think he is actually, at least one of the greatest of the last 20 years of any race. But I think he is just the greatest representation of black masculinity on screen, ever. And that, includes Sidney Poitier, whom I grew up with and love beyond all measure. But I think just in terms of the types of roles and the range of roles that he's represented, and his abilities as an actor and what he signifies, and the intelligence of all of his choices, and sustaining a career for such a long time. Because when we think of Sidney Poitier, we're basically thinking like, from 57 to about 71 or something, right? That was like, from the time that he did, I forget what it's called, the film, but with Tony Curtis, where they're chained together, they escape from prison chained together, which I think he was nominated for an Oscar for that, and it really catapulted him into box office stardom. To the early 70s, when really, he was doing those films aimed at black audiences. Then he really shifted gears and became more of a director. But Denzel now, he's had a starring career since the mid '80s probably. He won the Academy Award for Glory, and I think that was late '80s, '88, '86, something like that.
Shall I find out for you?
Yes, please. Because of the times changing, Denzel Washington had access to a greater range of roles. And also, but he still does them with the same kind of, charm and charisma and dignity, but actually arguably with a much greater range of an actor, and certainly a much greater range of roles. So I think he's like one of the most significant stars in history, really, not just, amongst his contemporaries.
Glory was 1989.
Glory was 1989.
Yeah.
And I think during that period, he did what Mo Better Blues, and with Spike Lee.
Yeah, Mo Better Blues, Malcolm X, of course.
Yes.
Much Ado About Nothing, Philadelphia.
Philadelphia was an enormous success. Anyway, he's been around for a long time, playing many different kinds of things. And I don't know how old he is now, but he looks around 60, and he's still doing this type of part with enormous gusto,
63,
and skill and charisma. He's just a pleasure to look at.
He should team up with Liam Neeson. Old men go on the rampage.
Listen, Denzel is so far superior to Liam Neeson. They don't belong in the same.
Yeah, but he doesn't have a catchphrase though.
I'm sure he does to some people. I wouldn't be able to quote you one.
I suppose. Well, there's certainly a few quotable lines from Training Day. But so let's talk about the Equalizer 2 in particular. So this film starts off with McCall in kind of this sort of retirement, semi-retirement kind of, and semi-pretending to be dead situation, living in a small kind of flat complex. And there's a real kind of sense of community around it. But he's also kind of on the down low, still doing the right thing in quite a violent way. The film early on, you see him retrieving this girl who's been kidnapped.
Yes,
that's the opening.
He's an avenger.
Right.
He avenges injustice. So he's hiding away. He's pretending he's dead. He's using the ability of being dead as a means of recharging, and also as a kind of safety, I suppose. But he can't help himself from writing what he sees as injustice in a sometimes very violent way.
Yeah. Well, I seem to recall at the end of the first film, he kind of advertises himself as the Equalizer. So after he's gone through what the first film takes him through, he puts an ad in the paper or something saying the Equalizer, call me. Like the A-Team, if you can find them, then you can call the Equalizer.
I don't remember that, though I remember seeing the film.
It's a snippet, I think. But this film suggests that, for instance, when he saves the girl, the girl's mum doesn't know.
Yes.
So somehow he's found out about this, and he when he sees the girl later, he says, "Shh, don't tell anyone."
Yes.
So there's something kind of secret about it, and yeah, it is cute as well.
Yes.
He is a community figure in a way. There's this real sense of harmony to a lot of the film, and actually it's surprisingly gentle. There are bursts of violence, and there is a darker plot that works its way into the film, of course. But when you see the way his life, the way he conducts himself, and the way he conducts his life, there's a great deal of harmony. So, for instance, one of the women or one of the characters with whom he lives in this complex is this Muslim woman, and you see in a very deliberately composed shot they live opposite a synagogue, and it's like that's all that's made of it, which is nothing, but it just suggests this kind of sense of harmony and people living alongside each other in this harmonious way, which is kind of pleasant, really.
Yes.
And he is a mentor of sorts, or a slight father figure, or at least he's attempting to be, to this young lad who's probably 16, 17 years old, who is kind of slightly being drawn towards the darker side of urban life and drugs.
Yeah, he's
and
on the
street
cusp
corners.
of trouble.
Right. And his brother was shot. So Denzel from McCall is trying to keep him away from that. And it's kind of it's a plot point that makes its way into the main thrust of the film, I suppose, because he becomes that young lad becomes something that he has to protect right at the end.
That's what makes him vulnerable.
But for a long time, it's really just a separate thing. It's just about developing McCall's character, and showing you who he is and what he'll do to do the right thing and try and keep someone on the right path and this sort of thing.
I think it's an extraordinary film, actually, because on the one hand, you can look at it as just almost a superhero film. It's an action movie. But there were many elements of it that I found quite moving. Yeah, so actually human relationships get kind of really developed. And actually they're kind of quite rounded, really. There's quite a lot of them. So, he's got a friend of his wife's who he's in touch with. And you get a sense of a real kind of ease and a long-term relationship. And, it's wonderful work by the actors, actually. It's Melissa Leo.
Melissa Leo, yeah. She was from the first film as well.
Yes.
And the other thing is she is his sort of contact within the government that helps him find information, so on and so forth. So she's not just an old acquaintance, but she is that too.
Yes. But anyway, the actors bring a depth. Like, you get the sense that these people have a history and kind of, so...
And you see it in their skin as well, particularly with those two. Melissa Leo's got got this wrinkly old face basically, and Denzel Washington, it's in his hands.
Yes.
His hands are lived in and aged.
Yes.
And the way he kind of moves his wedding ring from one finger to the other suggests this feeling of him having lived in, like he's got a life that extends back in his memories, but also like his body is kind of lived in.
Yes.
He's not a young man anymore.
No.
And actually, when you get to the end of the film, or the final set piece, where he returns to where he used to live on this small town that's based on sort of an island, and it's there's a storm there, so everyone's being evacuated. You get this sense of like driving through memories, and the memories themselves being kind of under siege by this storm.
Oh, that's a lovely way of putting it. It's a beautiful mise en scène, actually, by Antoine Fuqua. All of those scenes, like, from the middle of the film onwards, you get this sense of disturbance. Leaves are always moving. Yeah, there's kind of, and you get a sense that it's autumn, but it's ominous, and and then kind of the storm brewing becomes almost like a state of mind and builds and builds and builds until the end, where actually, there is literally a storm, and the wind is such, and the fog is such, and so on, that actually sometimes you can't see clearly what's happening.
It's really overwhelming at points.
Yeah, and it's lovely to see how structured it is. Yeah, how kind of it becomes like an element in the film.
What McCall does for a living is drive a lift car.
Yes.
So he's a cabbie, and there's this wonderful sort of opening where it's really just a montage of him in the car listening to people's stories.
Yes.
So people are in the back seat and he sees them in the rearview mirror, and they are celebrating their graduation or a new baby, or they're saying, I'll see you soon,
or they're rehearsing for a job.
And the one guy is going off to Iraq, which was a little bit of a moment where he says,
yes,
I'll be here to pick you up when you come back.
Yes, the film is not a perfect. So one of the things that is, because I think it's such a highly skilled film, and Denzel is really magnificent in it, and it's got elements of mise en scène that I think are just wonderful, and some shots are just superb. And then there are elements where it just almost edges onto, it crosses the line, actually, not just the edges, of cliche or cheap sentimentality, right? The Iraq cabbie was one of those elements, really.
I mean, that's the one that stands out for me, and to be honest, it's also not as bad as it could be. I mean, the line that you're dreading hearing in that brief conversation is "Thank you for your service." Which is what he doesn't say. What he says is it your first tour? And the kid goes, yeah. And there's a pause. He doesn't say it immediately. You can tell that Denzel's character is processing this, and he's basically scared for the kid, really, worried for him. And, and that's when he kind of plucks up his courage to say, I'll be here to pick you up when you get back. Which is nice.
It's nice.
So it treads that line.
It treads that line. The other, there's not too many.
It stays scenes on the right side of it there.
There are not too many scenes like this, right? I don't want to make too much of an issue of it. I'm only kind of commenting on them because they stand out in the overall scheme of what is a very tactful, and beautiful and moving film, I think. But that scene stood out for me as just like, and the scene with the kid at the end, going to art school and going to school and talking about him drawing superheroes as a girl.
I thought that was sweet.
You thought that was sweet? I thought it was icky. But anyway, that was just those two moments, right?
Yeah, it is just those 2 moments, and it's a 2-hour film or so. It's and actually what I think is interesting about it, I remember the first film being much more exciting. Really, is the word. Much more pacey. And much more of a quote-unquote traditional sort of action/revenge movie.
Yes.
And this has elements of that, but actually it's so gradual.
It's gradual, and actually to be honest, I didn't like the way that the action was filmed here.
Right.
It was done in that style that I don't like, which is that you just see parts of bodies, right? You never see somebody actually doing the action. So you have an arm block or you have something blocking, and then kind of you move to the body, but it's all chopped up in too many ways that actually means that you can't see a person doing anything, or even feeling the danger. So I didn't I don't think the action is the most significant part of this film.
No.
I think the film kind of creates this mood. It's actually a film about, to borrow Spike Lee's words, it's about doing the right thing, right? It's kind of within the recognition that people don't, and that life is complex, and that people make the wrong choice, and so on. But actually, kind of, the film also has a kind of an imperative of, trying to make up for bad choices, or doing the wrong thing, or, insisting that there's a price to be paid for doing the wrong thing. So it's kind of a very moral film.
There is an element of that I think is unconvincing when he figures out who the bad guy is in this, and he has a conversation with him. The bad guy's talking about there being no such thing as right and wrong, really. We're just people doing shit, is what he says. And of course, Denzel doesn't really believe that.
Yes.
There's something that the guy says to him about, don't you think you've made mistakes that should sentence you to hell, something like that? And Denzel says 1,000 times over, or something. And that line is something that I just kind of don't believe. Like, I guess maybe he's just talking about his previous career as a killer for the government.
Well, I don't think he says that, because he was saying the Carlos Leon character says, basically, we used to be told to kill people, and we did. Now we get asked to kill people, and we do. And the only difference is that now we get paid for it. So that's the argument that the bad guy is trying to make. But I don't think it's an argument that's fully convincing to Denzel. I mean, I think, but there's an element of doubt. It becomes ambiguous but you at least get the feeling that at the moment he was doing it, he thought he was doing it for a greater good. So I think
I found something unconvincing about that, and I guess it's also partly to do with the nature of what the bad guy's kind of motivations are, which I think are pretty staid. And it's not to say they have to be original, but we have seen them before, and they're not particularly brilliantly expressed. Basically, the idea of maybe having been corrupted by the job that he was doing for the government and being disillusioned by it, and also being thrown on the trash heap, saying we don't need you anymore, and he doesn't like that.
I think the film misses an opportunity in not writing the Carlos Leon character in a more complex and interesting manner.
Yes.
And in not showing him to greater advantage. Because I've seen Carlos Leon in other films, and I'm just bowled over by him. I think he's like, this huge star in waiting. Or I've been thinking that, right? And then you watch this film and you go, oh, I was wrong, right? And actually, I don't think I was wrong. I just think,
this film doesn't show him off.
This thing doesn't show him off to advantage, you know, because he's been fantastic and explosive. Even in really shitty things, like, what was...
I don't know, but I'll find out for you.
Yes, he was in that Chinese film with... Oh God, the guy who...
Carlos Leon.
Yes.
You mean Pedro Pascal?
Sorry, Pedro Pascal.
I was wondering, I didn't see him in the cast list.
Yeah. Who's in Bourne?
Jeremy Renner.
No, the other one.
Matt Damon.
Yeah. So the Chinese film with Matt Damon.
Oh, War or something or other.
Yeah, he was completely charismatic and dazzling in that.
The Great Wall.
Yes.
Right.
And also on television.
Oh, he was in Kingsman 2 as well. That's where I recognise him from.
Yes, and he was very good in that.
Yeah, he was good,
right? And also, of course, Narcos. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not.
Which is brilliant in, right? So I think the film doesn't do the character justice, and then doesn't do the actor justice, really.
Fair enough.
What I found really fantastic about the film, aside from it being a film with a kind of a serious moral project, right? It's a film that's also kind of positing a view of society which is so opposite to what the current American government is positing as to be almost contestatory or an act of rebellion against, the dominant way of thinking now. So you touched on it earlier, where there was like the Muslim woman in the garden, and he passes by in synagogue, and then at the end you see a mural with Frederick Douglass, and
one of his friends that he gives lifts to is this old Jewish man who he helps reunite
with his sister, and what he gives to read to the young boy is Ta-Nehisi Coates, right, who wrote Black Panther, and many other things, right? So underlying themes of like education and so on, right? So the film has a really kind of serious project and a view of being in the world that's entirely the opposite of a government, which engages in disinformation and is only for the rich and so on. And actually it's very interesting that this film has this idea, this contestatory idea, I think, against the government and for an inclusive society that values intersectionality and education, and values learning from the past.
And also
right?
requires the people to actively participate. I kept thinking about the idea of community organisation, which is a really American idea. We don't see it so much over here. It's a really, really American idea of just getting involved in your community and doing and organising your community and doing things just for you. I remember there was a whole thing about when Barack Obama was running for president the first time, and people were just learning who he was. One of the things was that he was a community organiser back in the day, and of course the Republicans were saying, "What's a community organiser? That's meaningless." But it's not. Like it's when we talk about kind of grassroots politics, that's exactly what it is. It is the very
change.
Yeah, exactly. And this film has an ethos of that in a way.
Yes.
With the painting of the wall, and we're not going to get some company to do it. We're doing it ourselves with hard work and a toothbrush.
Yes.
I
loved all of that about the film, and I also loved that, because the Denzel Washington character in this movie is very meditative. Right, so I don't know if you noticed, but he doesn't listen to music. There's no TV, right? What we see him do is reading and thinking, and there is like the self-improvement ethos. So, one of the things is he's read the list of 100 great books, right?
That was for his wife, right? Well, that was from the first film where his wife died, and he said he vowed to read all these books for her, basically.
Right. Okay. Well,
and you're right. It had an ethos of self-improvement about it.
Yes. But actually you mentioning that is interesting because, if he finished the last book, which was Proust's In Search of Lost Time, was, the last book on his list, then, that ties in with the themes of the film as well. Yeah, kind of in search of lost time. The time is lost and he's in search of it. But actually it's the last book on the list, so it's a moment to kind of move on, to move your wedding ring from one side of your hand to the other, right? Like, kind of all of those things kind of connect in very interesting ways, and obviously, kind of ways that are thought through. So
I don't think it's what anyone would have expected from a sequel to the first film. Although the first film had those elements, this film is really steeped in them.
Yes.
It is a really meditative film for a film that is about a certain amount of revenge and killing, and ends with this huge action set piece.
Yes. It's definitely a fascinating film, and I think it kind of it's increased my respect for Antoine Fuqua as a director, actually, because I thought, like, some of the shots were marvelous, and that's one of the reasons why I waited at the end, and I just wanted to know who had filmed it, right? I'll forget.
I can find out for you.
Please do.
The cinematographer was Oliver Wood, who I think was in Harry Potter. Oliver Wood he was DOP. Oh, he's been going since the late 60s.
Right.
Let me see. Die Hard 2.
Okay, well, I love that.
Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, Sister Act 2, Mr. Holland's Opus, Face Off, U571, The Bourne Identity.
Well, he's done a lot of great films.
The Bourne Supremacy, and I assume, The Bourne Ultimatum.
Okay, well, that might explain some of the action sequences. They were too Bourne-y for me.
Ben-Hur recently, and Jack Reach and Never Go Back.
Right.
So that's a potted history of Oliver Wood, the cinematographer.
All right. Well, I think he did a fantastic job here, actually. So.
And I was saying to you, like, I like Antoine Fuqua's aesthetic of very long lenses, shallow focus, kind of rich lighting and contrast. These kind of very imposing, intimidating close-ups that you get of people from the cameras kind of below them, and they're looking across the table at someone else facing off, and like it has that feeling of quote unquote a film. You think of what a film looks like. That's kind of what Fuqua's aesthetic is in a way,
Yes.
and I love it. Like
Yes, I love it.
His films feel big.
Yes.
You know,
they feel like proper movies that are using all the opportunities available to show things in a complex manner on a big screen that makes the most of a big screen.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good moment to kind of wrap it up and just kind of say,
emphasize that it's really interesting.
I think it's more than interesting. I think it's kind of it almost touches greatness, but it doesn't quite get there. So it's hugely entertaining. And also quite a serious film, that kind of is much more interesting than the advertising or the reviews would have it. But it's not quite as great as I would have liked it to have been.
No, but beggars can't be choosers, and it's really good.
It's really, really good. So we recommend that you go see it. We just celebrated our 1st year anniversary. So thank you.
Our 1st year.
First year. Sorry. Bastard.
Our first anniversary.
English is not my first language. So don't make fun
he says
of me.
having grown up in Canada.
No.
Well, which language is it?
Spanish.
No, I mean, which language is English? Is it your second or third?
It's my third.
French before English?
Yes.
Fucking Canadians, man.
Yes, you learned something.
It
Anyway,
was our first anniversary.
It's our first anniversary. Now I forgot what I was saying because you were making fun of me. So it's our first anniversary. We've had lovely feedback, which we really appreciate from all of you. And part of the purpose of, well, there was two purposes for this podcast, really. One, I wanted this sense of, giving people the option of just eavesdropping, on a conversation by two movie lovers on something, because I often felt this, particularly, if you love movies but don't always have someone to go with to the movies, it's always kind of just nice to kind of get a sense of what other people are thinking. Yeah, in a kind of a less formal and structured way than a review, which can have all kinds of agendas. And I wanted it to be like a kind of a pure movie-going thing. Yeah, that kind of. So we've not read reviews, and we haven't talked about it even amongst ourselves. We just come immediately from the film and kind of tell you what we think. So I wanted to give people that option of having that available to them. But I also just kind of wanted to really engender or incur or spark kind of a continuing conversation on the movies, right? And of course, kind of for that, your feedback or your comments are kind of an essential part of kind of, keeping I was going to say loop, but I meant more like a spiral of discussion on these movies going.
Lovely.
I've bored even Mike with that. So, thank you very much for listening.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye.